Today we're gonna go over the deck editor for it's our part 8 of our series for Marvel Snap Game. This is what it looks like, and what happens is you use the thumb to slide and scroll through your cards that you own, and then when you hit on a deck or the plus button, it will go to another area where you can actually add them to your deck. And what happens is there's two parts. You have this horizontal scroll view and this vertical one. And you have this mask so that it masks the other. So we're going to talk about all the challenges that happen with that and with our setup and how to do that. So let me show you where we're at. So I have this new scene, this game scene, but crap, might have done it on the wrong one. But we have this the cards the slide, and we have the what is it called, the view, so that way we can mask it. So if I want to mask it here, we can. Uh, and up and down. So we have that, and then we have the decks. And here, this one's a horizontal. We only have a few, but right there. And then when we click on the deck, it will show all the cards in here that are in the deck. And then we can click on it, and I can either cancel or remove it from the deck, and it will remove it. So if I remove this one, Chronos, and you'll see that it'll prop up here. So I can add Chronos back in. I'll have in here. I can add to deck. So I'll remove as many as I want from the deck. And right now I don't have any new images, so it's all the text and the power. But as you can see, they're all here, and I have, let me see, I have 6 here, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's updating. So it's pretty cool. So it's working. The last thing we need to do is do the same thing with that we did with the avatar on the previous one, where you select which deck you're gonna use and actually save it so that you can use that. But right now, this is deck 3. I'm gonna go back, and if I go to deck 3, it's saved. If I go to deck 4, it's a different one. You can tell. If I remove, let's say, remove a few, so that you can tell the difference. And maybe what I'll also add is a edit button, so you can change the name of the deck. You have deck 3 has 1, and deck 4 has those 6 showing here. You can remove it from here. So if I click on these, it'll remove it. So if it's in the deck, it'll be grayed out, and it will let me remove it from the deck. So you can either add or remove. Those are the two options. And that's how Marble Snap does it. There's a few other features like auto populate the deck and stuff that we're not gonna go over. But for the most part, this is pretty straightforward. It's working. It's modular. We can do as many decks as we want. So let's go dive into it so I can show you how it went. It was a little bit challenging to do because it's not my expertise at all, and I dread it. I don't like to do this kind of stuff. It's very like it's just work, and it's not fun for me. But maybe you might like it. Inventory stuff is not my forte. So what I did is like I couldn't wrap my head around, okay, like how am I gonna even start? Because usually with other mechanics like you've seen, I have an idea of what I'm gonna do. But in this scenario, I didn't know where to start. I knew what we needed. And so I went to ChatGPT, and I was a little bit scared because ChatGPT will give you a bunch of stuff that will probably not work. And it's really hard to do systems with ChatGPT. I usually like to keep it simple for ChatGPT, so that way I'm in charge of the design of everything in the architecture. ChatGPT just helps me do bits and pieces. But in this scenario, I was going, okay, I need this. I need the like I knew I needed the horizontal view and the vertical view, and so I went over that and I told it, hey, I need these buttons need to do certain things, and we need to, to do this. And so this is what I told it, and then it started going. I gave me the deck manager to save and remove decks, the scriptable object for the decks, which I already had. So I had to tell it again, hey, we already have a deck scriptable object that has other stuff. So we added some of these things into the deck, like max cards and I think the deck name. We already had the string of cards, so we had to change that. Then we had this deck editor manager is the main guide, the main script that will handle everything, switching between panels and updating the cards and whatnot. And so this was really good because it gave me a foundation of where to start and kind of how to fix things. And so I trusted ChatGPT and I told it some other stuff. Hey, this is my code. And so then it modified it, the deck scriptable object to have the previous stuff that we had for the cards, because this deck scriptable object also is the deck that we draw from and we shuffle and all that stuff. So I just added the remove and add card for editing the deck. And then I kind of guided it a little bit more. We did the UI presenter. So one thing that I want to go over is the setup that I showed you last time with the cards. So we have, if you look, we have this cool, frame break stuff, and this all these things are sprite mask and sprite renderers. These are not UI components. And so when you want to do scroll view and UI panels, these masks will not work. And the mask for the view will not mask these things because they are components. They're game objects, they're not UI, and they won't register. So in order for me to have the cards displayed in a certain way, I created this card UI, which you will see it doesn't have the same effect, but it has the same component. So that's a compromise, and I have to figure out. You would have to do a shader that does the parallax for the UI if you wanted to do that. But I noticed that when you do the pop up on the deck manager, you can see the break effect. So I'll show you what I did. So this is strictly for UI. So I did a UI presenter just for the displays. And then when you click on the card, you can see it better. So let me show you. So when you see these cards, these are the UI. But when I click on it, you'll see that this is the the, the one with the parallax. See? So I use this card content pop-up with the sprite render. So this one is different. It's in here, the display. So the display is using the same break as the previous one. It's using the sprite renders. So that way, when you see the card up close, you can see the foil and all the cool effects that you want to add to it. But then when you're looking at this, it's just the image, right? So it's cheap. That way, it accounts for what is it called, like performance. If you want it to be more performant, because you don't want all these things shining and creating crazy stuff. So you can still have the color and stuff pop up and still have cool effects. It's just not the parallax is not there, and that might help with performance. But that's how I did it because I was not sure on what to do with that, and so I just created two different prefabs and a different presenter for each one so that it would display the same information. So everything's the same, and we don't have to create a billion prefabs. That's the nice thing about the setup is that the scriptable objects holds all the information, and then it's just how I choose to display it. And so no one has to create 50 billion different variations on the cards. Okay, so that's that. And so that's why I have that set up. So let's go over, that was the first hurdle. I had to figure out, okay, I have to redo the card for the UI. And then the next thing we went over is, okay, how do I build the setup? Because I had no idea how to structure it. And because the ChatGPT gave me the deck manager, okay, I have a viewer panel. This is the top scroll. Then I have a card slot. This is where we see the cards when we're editing. So we have a deck editing, and then we have a deck selection. So deck selection is the first screen you see where you select the decks you want to edit. Once you click on it, you're in deck editing mode, right? You're editing these things. And so we had a Boolean for detecting when we're in each mode. Because then we needed to check which cards were in the deck. That way we would um, mark them with the overlay, and that's what. And then we have the pop-up. So we have these things. This is the display pop-up where you have the card that shows, okay, this is like the card, and this also had the buttons to remove or add the cards in here. And these buttons are there only when you're in deck editing mode, right? So that's why we have those. So it's the same view. It's just the pop-up is the same. It all behaves the same. And each card in there, because it's an image again, we're able to put a button on it. So if you look at these UIs, they have a button in here that we can utilize to then say, okay, the person clicked on it. So that's something that's easier to do than a raycast, right? Because if we did it the way we did before with the zones, we had to raycast and detect it and then check which card it is. Instead, we just add a button. And when we spawn the card, we give it a button. I'll show you that right now in the deck editor manager. So this is the heart of everything. And honestly, I gotta give credit to ChatGPT because it helped me get started, and it's something that I had no idea how to start. So we have the populate the deck. So in here, we just go through all the decks we have and say, okay, these are all the decks, and that's hard coded. I drag them up. So we don't have a method for adding a new deck scriptable object and creating a new one, which we could add. But I don't think it's out of scope. We don't need it. If I need to, we can have 20 deck slots and just leave it as that and have them all empty, and then people can rename them what they want to. In here, so that's that. It's pretty straightforward, and when we add the image or the prefab, it's a button. So we give it this listener to say, okay, when this button's pressed, um, this is the text. Populate the deck editor with the deck inside, and the deck has all the cards, and so it'll populate those slots with the cards. And then we'll show the editor. We'll display the panels that we need to. So this is all just panel handling. Let's see here. So we deactivate one and set the other one. We check if it's in editing mode. See, these are the things that the Boolean, we toggle the Boolean so that way we can later use it. So we know we're in deck editing mode. Back to deck selection. And then we set the deck to null. So that way when it iterates, here I'll show you. Every time it checks this, it removes all the children and it says, okay, what are the cards in the database? And if the deck is not null, okay, if there's a deck, we check if the card's in the deck. We could also do a check for it's in deck editing mode. Because if we're in editing mode, we probably already have a current deck. So either way, it's the same check. But an edge case would be, can we get to the deck editing mode and not have a deck? Because that would be bad. Because we need a deck to add things to, cards to. So usually those are the same thing. So we could use that instead of the Boolean. So that's something that you could talk about in a code review and figure out, like, is it worth having a Boolean when you already have a something that tells you whether you're in deck editing mode or not? That's after the fact. Okay, so anyway, so we say, okay, does the current deck contain this card? If it does, this is the Boolean. and then we add the button. We show the pop, and this is the button that will show up the card pop up. It will display it, and it'll say, "Okay, this is the card, and it is in the deck, or it's not." And then the presenter will check. So this presenter is the UI that's in the viewer, the one that we scroll up and down. That's what shrinks it and sets it to an overlay. So if we go in it, it's just the overlay panel that's like a opacity of like 0.8 and it's black, and then we scale it down a little bit. Um, and then in here, this one, this is for the buttons. Remember when we said the pop-up has an add and a remove button? So depending of the pop-up is, okay, are we in the is deck in editing mode, and is it in the deck? Show card. So the show card is the same thing as before. We display the power and everything the same. But then if it's in editing mode, we need to add components. We need to make sure we show the right button first, and that we add the specific listener to that button. Say, okay, we're going to add this function, add to deck to that button. And if it's not in editing mode, we turn those buttons off. So that's how we do it. And it seems pretty straightforward, but it's hard to understand how everything's going on because there's a lot of things happening at once. Presenter, this is one thing that I had to fix. I had to go in and fix some things that ChatGPT kind of overlooked. ChatGPT couldn't put these things together. Like it assumed one thing was doing one, and I had to debug it, and I realized that things weren't connecting. So one of the things that wasn't connecting is this right here, the pop-up. The display here, these buttons were adding and removing from the decks in here, but they weren't, there was old code that would change the deck. So in here we had the deck, and it would add and remove to the deck. So I had to remove this code and add this, a reference to the manager, because this is always here. So what I had is I added this reference to the deck manager, and then I did this. I just said, okay, add card to deck. We already know which card we have because it's a display. We know what card it is, and we just need to add it or remove it. We know which one it is we need to do because of this. So that's why we had this isn't deck boolean done before, because we needed to store this so that we had the right add or remove button set up. And so this, then again, the deck editor is the main guy that has everything. And so instead of me trying to pile on responsibility to another script, I just go back, reference the main guy, and say, okay, you do it. You have reference to everything. You know what's going on. So I have the current deck, remove it. I save the deck in the manager. I populate the UI. So this is what like reshuffles it and removes the card from the UI. And this is what reshuffles or not reshuffles, but resets the view for the scroll, the vertical scroll. And so that way this updates the UI to remove the cards that needs to be removed or add the card that needs to be added, depending on the functionality. Okay, and then we close down the pop-up because we are done using. Okay, so one last thing that I wanted to go over that I want to do a voiceover as a reference is that I forgot to do show you how I did the scroll part. For a second, I assumed that you might already know how it's done, but I don't want to assume anything, so I'll show you. So each one of these is you can, in a UI, you have the option to do this scroll view, and it will give you the scroll with the horizontal and the vertical. And so all I did is I'll just remove these from the scroll view and rename them. So this is the scroll viewer. I removed these scroll bars, but I still kept this. So this one, that's why I meant by horizontal and vertical. So this one's a vertical, and this one's horizontal. And what happens is I have nothing in here. But what I did is in this content, I have a grid layout. I'm one max row, and I have a horizontal content size fitter for horizontal fit. And then there's multiple ways of doing the same thing, but this is how I found. This one is for vertical, right? And I made it flexible. So if I look in here, the way I test these before I start doing things is I just grab an image and just go like this. And then I hit play and test it to make sure it's working. Uh, so I know if the thing is working. The other thing, um, so if you look in here, you are will test with the cards to see like the spacing and if it was good or not. See like in that one, I could change it so that the mask is better. Right there is good. Stuff like that. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew these components because they're sometimes hard to grasp your head around. So this viewport has the mask right here, and this is where the contents are and the layout. Reason why that is so that this layout would stretch the card. Scroll. The scroll rectangle is what controls the scrolling. Um, but that's everything. So if you have any questions, let me know. If you know anybody that needs help or wants to join our school community where we help people finish their games, they're welcome to join. And we'll see you on the next video.